Good evening and welcome to this evening's program. I hope you've had a good, safe, and fun summer, full of family and fun and travel and friends. And I'm Jim Van Epps. As many of you know, I'm the president of the Savannah Council and host for this evening's presentation by Dr. Michele Devlin of the faculty of the United States Army War College. And I am looking forward to this. I've had a little experience with it, so I can't wait to hear what she's going to say. But let's start first with our sponsors and Kreitz Auto Group, providing automotive excellence in Savannah and across the Central Empire for over 80 years. We're very grateful to Kreitz, which continues as a platinum sponsor, our highest level of sponsorship for the Savannah Council for this year. We're also grateful to Planters Inn, which is a continuing sponsor. There are other hotels in the Savannah area, but there isn't another boutique hotel that offers the extravagant amenities, elegantly appointed rooms, and historic locations that you'll find in Planters Inn. Thank you, Planters Inn, for continuing as a sponsor this year. Next, I don't want to get there yet. Let me introduce Chip O'Brien, who would like to introduce you to a new feature that we are going to offer to our members. Chip?
Okay, sure. Thanks, Jim. I'm going to start with late-breaking news that after a hiatus of a couple of years, the Council is going to be sponsoring a series of Great Decisions courses. Some of you have heard about these before. Some of you have participated. We've had as many as 5 of them, of 15 people each. It's a discussion group. It's produced by the Foreign Policy Association. And one of our newer directors, Jennifer Dwyer, please stand, Jennifer, is our overall coordinator this year for it. So thank you for being willing to do that. In a nutshell, you're going to get an email from Jennifer, and the program will be in February and March, 8 successive weeks, an hour and a half at each meeting. You'll see a video that's produced by the Foreign Policy Association. You'll get a workbook or a book of articles on the topic. And I was just trying to pull up the list of topics, but you are going to have to wait until Jennifer's letter comes out to you all. So that's the late-breaking news. Now, let me get to the scheduled news here. Let's see, Jim, where are we here? One more. Okay. So this is, just so everyone here knows, and Doug Everly, who's our membership chair, will be sending a note out. The World Politics Review is and I'll go to the next page, is a free benefit that we're going to offer you all. So what we did is we subscribed with WPR so that we could give it to you free, just as we're doing with Daily Chatter, and that's mentioned in the second bullet point here. Daily Chatter has been signed up by more than 50% of our members, and we have the highest opening rate of Daily Chatter of any of the groups that read Daily Chatter. It's about a 5-minute read. It's a very quick overview, and the students are allowed to get these 2 publications too. It's where Dr. Goldberg gets all the tough questions, so you might want to get these things. This WPR will complement Daily Chatter, which is a newsletter. This is an analysis. Now, for those of you who may think you have enough in your inbox already, the first thing is you control this. If you want it, you put your email in, click on the link that we're going to send you, and you'll get it free. You'll also be able to choose if you only want to get it once a week instead of every day. So there's a lot of flexibility in it. But as I said, you opt in. As the third bullet point says, we don't send your email to anybody. You control that, and we've kept that tradition up. The next page gives you a little bit, it's very hard to read, but it basically is what the registration link looks like. So you click on this, not much work, name, address, and email, and away, you get it that same day. A number of our directors have been getting this recently. We've been studying getting this for you all for the last year and a half. So we think it's really good. We'd like to hear your feedback after you get it. This is a screenshot, a little tough to read, of today's daily review. It's, pretty much right on, timely. Biden's border policy dilemma. It's something that we're going to hear a little bit about. One of our directors is giving a talk later in the year in November, Susan Theriault, and this is really an interesting topic, a very complicated topic, and obviously one that affects all of us. And the news just recently about Venezuela and what the government has done there is very interesting. So this is a typical kind of article that they did today, in depth. I haven't read it yet, so I'm not going to tell you it's good, but I think it is. So you're going to get an email, and you're going to learn more. You can learn more about. We're going to give you some ways to click and see what this company is about. It's nonpartisan. It's very. It's filled with very good journalists and very good research team. And we've had Susan Catron, who's one of the top people at The Current, which is also a digital, local, coastal Georgia news. There's Susan right there at the membership table. She also vetted it so that we now know it's really good journalism if she says it is. So please consider this new free enhancement for your membership. Jim?
Great. Thanks, Jim. One next comment, and we want to give you an idea of what the board is thinking. We're giving serious thought to holding more programs in downtown Savannah, as we did with our May program that we held down there on the South China Sea. Now, those who've been with us for a while will recall that that's where our programs had been held downtown until the cost of the venue downtown got more than we were able to finance, rose above our means. Now, the Coastal Georgia Center on Farm Street is offered to us free of charge by the city, except for the cost of security, which is relatively minor. It has plentiful and easy parking. It's change, I realize. We hope you'll stay with us if we make this adjustment. One thing for sure, our October program will be right here. And I'll update you further in our program next month. So, our speaker this evening, Dr. Devlin, is a professor of environmental security at the U.S. Army War College and professor of Arctic health and human security with the National Science Foundation. She has an extensive resume that I hope you've read in our program announcement, but a few details. She's a doctor of public health. She's a registered nurse, and she's an emergency medical technician. Her primary specialties including circumpolar human terrain of the North, environmental migrants, indigenous populations, and civil military response to climate disasters as a start. She was a professor of global health at the University of Northern Iowa for 27 years, and most recently she traveled to Antarctica and has also spent 6 months living and working above the Arctic Circle. So, her topic, and this is, you will recall most of this out of the program announcement that was sent. You rarely see Antarctica and national security in the same sentence. But what is currently happening on the frozen continent, especially the expansion of Russian and Chinese interests, is critically important. It has expanded. The polar regions, both the Arctic and Antarctic, have experienced dramatic average temperature increases, and the resulting thawing of glaciers and ice sheets has impacted and will continue to impact the global environment. Key here, the Antarctica Treaty System, which was signed in 1959, was intended to preserve Antarctica as a protected sanctuary for scientific research. Dr. Devlin will relate her experience studying and working in polar regions on environmental security areas and recently returning from visiting the southern frozen continent. So, with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Michele Devlin.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it bounced, yeah.
My knuckles.
That's okay.
There we go.
That's all right. Okay, now we got it. Great. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you. I am so honored to be here. I really wanted to thank thank you all for the invitation to come up, and for Jim and the wonderful officers and board members so far that I've been able to meet. I absolutely love Savannah. You probably work for all the local real estate agents, and you just get people here to speak and then convince them to live here, because it's incredible. I really, really love it. So thank you so much. So a couple of things. One, for all of the non-student members here, you have a big hello to you from Dr. Jose de la Cruz. He is my buddy. He works with me at the War College. We're actually in the same hall. We share a wall, and we partner together on a lot of stuff like this and fun topics like transnational criminal organizations and climate change and climate migrants. And are you going to you're talking about climate migrants, I assume? And, yeah, right, and aside all that, very, very important topic to understand. So anyway, he sends his very, very best to you all. And I have a question for the students here. Where are you from? Which school? Okay. What grade? Are you all from one class? What grade? Oh, awesome. And who brought you? Okay, excellent. Excellent, good job. That's really, really terrific. Wonderful. Well, nice to meet you. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're learning about these topics that you're hearing. They're incredibly important. It's your future and sort of what's happening out there in the world. So anyway, wanted to just give you kind of a briefing and update on what's going on with Antarctica. And it's a fascinating place when we talk about the South Pole and the southern polar area. And so I do work at the U.S. Army War College. It's in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It's by Gettysburg, about half an hour away from Gettysburg, a couple hours west of from Philadelphia. And we're like the senior Army institution. So you've probably heard of West Point, and they train our younger cadets to be lieutenants. At the Army War College, we train colonels, basically. People are 45, even 50 years old, and they go on to they're the top 10% of the military, and they go on to take over brigade command, like big deal responsibilities in national security. We train a number of the generals. They come through the Army War College itself as well. And we do both Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marines are there, then also special civilians, and also international fellows. So international colonels, about half of them will go on to be generals back home. So it's a really cool place to work, very dynamic. It's like working in a think tank. And I go in every day humbled by the people around me, and I like to think that I go home smarter because I learn from all of them, but they're absolutely amazing. So it's an honor to be able to work with them. But in my field of environmental security, and I've got a health background, so for us, this is really a global public health issue when we look about how the world is changing, the environment changing, and then what does it mean from a security standpoint? And I would hope that some of you that are younger here may even consider this as a future career field, because we need good minds like yours and young people to get into these kinds of security fields, because it's changing very, very quickly, the world around us. So take a look at this. So Antarctica and environmental security. So let me ask you, what's wrong with the map? Right? Okay. There's no continent down there. There is no southern continent. Right? Antarctica is not even on the map. Now, I'm going to age myself here, but I think some of you that are not our younger students here, how many of you grew up and you remember even when the Arctic was not on the maps? I used to think that Greenland just had a straight top, right? Because a lot of these maps we grew up with would not even have the Arctic. It would sort of stop in northern Canada-ish. And nothing would be above, and certainly not Antarctica. And the scary thing is, a lot of us, if we Google it or in our books or, materials that we have, I think all of us are here because we love international affairs and international relations. A lot of us, these are the kinds of maps we're still using. Let me assure you that they are now out of date, because climate is changing, our environment is changing, and there are huge regions of the world that used to be very inaccessible except to small numbers of maybe indigenous populations up north. But as these parts of the world are warming now, They become real. They become places that we see a lot of geostrategic interest suddenly between the Americans, the Russians, Chinese government, other nation states around the world. And we never even used to look at these parts of the world. So, again, it's a totally different thing going on. So this is what should be on that map down in the south and stretched out, of course. It's the continent of Antarctica. It is literally an entire continent, and it's big. It's a huge landmass. It's the fifth largest continent in the world. What's interesting, we're obviously here in the United States. It's bigger than the U.S. It's 1.5 times the size of U.S., 1.5 times the size of Europe. And that's just when it's not even winter. When it's wintertime, it doubles in size because you have a lot of ice around it that you can walk on, you can function on. It increases the size of a continent. So it's very, very large. It's a huge landmass that we don't even look at or think about in a lot of our maps. Unlike the Arctic up in the northern polar areas, Antarctica has no real native indigenous population. So up in the Arctic, in the northern polar areas, and that part of the world, I've done a lot of work up there and lived up there, actually in northern Alaska, before coming down to the War College. You have indigenous populations, right? You've got more than 90 languages spoken up north. About 4 million people live up in the Arctic up north. Nobody lives down south. They work there, but they don't technically live there. And there are no real indigenous populations. No land mammals, like no bears, that type of thing. Really no significant trees or plants of anything because of the extreme environment. It also has lots and lots of beautiful islands all around it. And as you go, I was down there in February. I went to Antarctica in February for work and did an environmental study tour. As you get closer to it in the ocean, let me ask you, what's the name of the ocean? If you haven't seen it here, anybody know? It's a relatively newly named ocean. You got it. You should be in the Navy, right? When we meet up, good job. When we meet up at the Army War College, it's always amazing how many people don't necessarily know that. Although then the naval students are like, yeah, it's ours. We know it's southern, it's Southern Ocean. But you actually, as you get closer to Antarctica, around the 60th parallel, the temperatures change very dramatically in the water. It's called a convergence zone, and it gets very, very cold. It drops by 10 or more degrees, and literally the animals change, the ecosystem, temperatures, wind patterns, all of that stuff, and that's a famous convergence. The other thing, too, when you think just from a security standpoint, you think of the American security forces, it covers 20% of the southern hemisphere. And again, we don't even see it on a lot of maps. What are we doing? Why? We've got to get, at least visually, we have to start catching up with the way the world is changing around us. And what's fascinating is, by far, its most precious resource is fresh water and ice. It's got, the National Science Foundation estimates that it's got 90% of the world's ice is right there on that continent. 70% of the world's fresh water. Now, it's mostly frozen, except where it's melting underneath some of those glaciers, but that's a massive resource in a world now that we worry about things like water insecurity, right, and drought and issues like that. So it's a huge resource. And that is Antarctica. So I had never been there before. Again, as I said, I went in February, and I think like a lot of our adult members in this audience, they are exceptionally well-traveled and have been all over the world. And honestly, now I think my personal opinion is it's the most beautiful place on Earth for me of all the different continents. Have any of you been to Antarctica, by the way? Have you gone? Yeah, I can talk about tourism too, just if you want to know how to do this, because it's very, very, I think, really neat to do it. But that's what it looks like. So when you get there, you go through the Drake Passage between South America and Antarctica. You go by ship, and then you hit Antarctica, and you see all kinds of ice. So it's literally icebergs that are bigger than skyscraper buildings, like sideways. They're massive. They're the size of aircraft carriers, some of those icebergs. Some are little, all different shapes, colors, and sizes. You'll see ice that may be 10,000 or more years old. It's crystal clear floating. It's like glass. It's that clear. You'll see little pancake ice in the water. And then you see the continent itself. And I was surprised. I'm used to working up in the Arctic, which is basically tundra. If any of you have been to the North Slope of Alaska, the American Arctic above the 66th parallel, that's tundra. For the Midwesterners in here, I lived in Iowa. It looks like Iowa. Okay, flat. Nebraska, flat. White, flat. This blew me away. To me, it looked like the Himalayas. Incredibly mountainous, surrounded by icebergs and the ocean. Visually breathtaking, more than anything I've ever seen in my life. So I think it's fascinating to see. So a lot of times now, again, we're looking now at security issues in areas of the world, again, that we didn't used to think about a lot. And so you have the Arctic up north Pole area, and then the southern polar area, Antarctica. And even with this, we like to stereotype them as being the same, and they're just cold, remote, empty, barren places. They're not. They're actually teeming with geopolitical intrigue, strategic intrigue, people, tourists, visitors, and incredible physical terrain that's pretty amazing. So the Arctic up north is ocean. Arctic Ocean, surrounded by countries, the 8 Arctic countries, including the U.S. The South Pole is a continent surrounded by ocean. Okay, it's an actual landmass. It's very interesting, and I didn't realize this till I started getting involved with the polar regions. The Arctic is the world's second biggest desert. It's very dry. Yeah, it's white, and there's ice and snow up there a lot of the year, not all the year, but it's dry. It doesn't get much. Antarctica is even drier. It's technically the world's largest desert. Not all, but large parts of Antarctica, like the dry valleys by McMurdo Station, they've not had rain, precipitation in 2 million years. It's that dry. It's like, wow, you don't think of it as, I'm from Southern California. I know what desert looks like. It's brown, right, and it's dry. That's not what this looks like. It's white and cold, but it's desert, large parts of it. It's quite interesting. Also, the coldest of all of our continents, you definitely can, in certain areas, get temperatures of like minus 120, minus 130. You get very, very heavy winds. It's a very windy continent. You can get winds, 200-mile-an-hour winds. And again, that dryness. So large parts of the continent may only get a couple of inches of precipitation a year, 2 or 6 inches. It's fascinating that you don't get more. And then what surprised me, okay, where are the Himalayas? Where are the Himalayas, the mountain range? What continent are they on? Asia, right? They're, near Afghanistan, India, kind of Pakistan, that whole part of the world. You've got Nepal, and those are obviously the highest mountains. But as an overall continent, it's amazing. Antarctica is actually higher on average. The average height on Antarctica is about 7,500 feet. In fact, if you look at the continents kind of in the middle or so where the South Pole is, I think the South Pole is about 8,500 feet, somewhere right in there, 9,000 or so. It's up high. It's on these huge mountain ranges, so very, very mountainous. Definitely breathtakingly beautiful. Old explorers like Shackleton and Amundsen and Peary, some of these famous polar explorers, would describe both regions of the world in very beautiful ways, but you'll hear phrases like Antarctica being described as this mystical, magical kingdom that appears out of nowhere. So it's fascinating. Very, very interesting. But from an environmental standpoint, we see a lot of warming. So Antarctica is warming 3 times faster than anywhere else on Earth. The Arctic is warming 4 times faster. So this is definitely a very serious deal. And it's interesting because Antarctica, you've got all these mountains, but they're covered right now with a lot of glaciers. Some of those glaciers are a couple miles deep, just of ice, on top of all of those mountains. So again, very, very dramatic. And who are the animals that live in, not that this relates to security issues, but just want to make sure you know the animals. So polar bears live where? North or south? north. They live in the north. We do not have any bears down south in the southern pole, nor do we have like walruses. We have animals like these. So top left, what are they? You've all seen the penguins, right? Okay, they really are adorable. We always say a lot of humans think penguins look like people. The joke is that the penguins think we look like tall penguins. And when you're there, they really, honestly, they do come right up to you. They are so not used to human contact that they will come waddling up and they wait for you to get out of their way so they'll pass. I've never seen anything like it. It's crazy. But there are well over a dozen. In fact, I think almost 20 or more species of penguins. So great diversity in them as creatures. You will see a number of different whale species around the continent. And what is that animal on the top right? That's the apex predator. Any idea? Yeah, it's a seal. Correct. It's a seal. Anybody heard the name? Leopard seal. Yeah, if you Google it, you'll find some pretty awesome pictures. They're ferocious. And usually seals are not, but when you're there, you will see them resting on icebergs as you're floating around in your zodiac. They look like dragons. Some of them that I saw were about the length of this stage and probably about this thick. And old southern polar explorers used to think they were dragons. They couldn't quite figure out what they were. They're one of the few seal species that truly can be ferocious and attack you. In fact, if you're out in the zodiacs, they're the number one reason that the zodiacs get popped. Because they're kind of like, checking you out and while you're there. So a very different but incredibly diverse ecosystem and animal system there. And that is Antarctica. So when you come up upon it, again, it's huge, the size of 1.5 of the U.S. That is what it looks like. These incredible mountain ranges, incredible colors. You see the different kinds of icebergs ranging from huge to just having almost like these little floating pancake ice things on the water. It's very, very fascinating. Stunningly beautiful. 100 shades of blue and white and gray and even purple. Absolutely stunning. So from an environmental security standpoint, it's kind of interesting to see what's going on down there. It is obviously the most remote and most extreme environments on any of our continents. Again, it's an area that we typically had nothing to do with. Most people on Earth until only recently. However, having been there, I can tell you now there are definitely people on it. There are a lot of people. It's actually very ethnically diverse, very culturally diverse. First of all, there are about 4,000 people that work there. And they are scientists and researchers. We have a bunch of them. The Chinese have a lot, Russians, many other countries. In fact, there are about 30 different nations that have researchers on the continent. How many of you are STEM majors, interested in science, technology, engineering, math? Of you young people? Good. Maybe one day you'll be a researcher here. They do look for a lot of STEM majors, science, math, engineering, to work there. It's really fascinating. About 4,000 of them over the summer, and then only about 1,000 over winter, or poleys and stay in the South Pole, for instance, in that area. By the way, because of the seasons, it's Southern Hemisphere, when is their summer? What? Yeah, it's the exact opposite of ours. So for them, maybe November-ish through February-ish is the Antarctic summer, right? Opposite of what we have here in the Northern Hemisphere. The Americans have not the oldest, but among the longest presence there in terms of countries on the continent. We run the largest of the research stations, McMurdo Station, MacTown. You may have heard about it. It's a very famous scientific base. We've got Palmer Base there, and the actual South Pole base as well, and then lots of different temporary camps, research camps that get set up in warmer months all over. It's also interesting, too, from an international relations standpoint. It's unlike anywhere else on Earth. It's not run, it's not a country, it's not, you don't have a national government. It's governed by what's called the Antarctic Treaty System. It's very unique on Earth, where really since 1959, a number of countries got together initially, and then it's increased now. And the world has basically agreed, at least for now, to make it an area of peaceful scientific research. You can't build there, you can't like develop there. You can't put troops or, military people down there for military reasons. There are military people there for logistics, but in terms of war fighting, conflict, it's not allowed there. And it emphasizes, again, global cooperation. So it's very unique. You'll not see it anywhere else around there. But Antarctic Treaty System. So again, a big global research living laboratory. There's probably about 35,000 square miles there of some kind of human footprint on Antarctica. Like I said, with more than 30 nations already have a footprint on it, mostly along the coast because internally it's even more extreme to live there. But the challenge we face now from an environmental security is that the world is warming, with climate change, and so we're seeing the South Polar region as well as the Arctic, the northern circumpolar areas of the world, they are thawing, right? They're thawing, they're warming, and as you can imagine, that has triggered a lot of geopolitical competition and interest from many different countries. Kind of a slow-moving gold rush, not like tomorrow, but sort of we're hedging, for opportunities to potentially gain economic resources up in the Arctic. And even in Antarctica, countries are looking at it, even though it's protected from development right now. Nonetheless, they're looking at it strategically, thinking, hey, 20, 30, 40 years, maybe there's opportunity there. Things like minerals, gas, oil, rare earth minerals, fisheries that surround the continent. So you now have a lot of political interest, even in a place as remote as Antarctica, and even in a place governed by a peaceful international cooperation treaty. So, again, fortunately, though, we're not paying enough attention to it from a security standpoint. We're just like, yeah, it's not even on our maps. It's like, whatever. We'll deal with it in 25 years when the Antarctic Treaty can be renegotiated. And it's like, no, we're out of time. So these are some of the scenes, again, of Antarctica as you go through sort of the western, the peninsula area and stuff. That is actually a base. That's a scientific base from the Argentinians that we pass. That's kind of what it looks like. I went there again in February. It's technically their summer, so you can see the bare rock. A lot of black, that heavy-duty rock, very rocky. You'll see a lot of these peaks again, a lot of glaciers and ice sheets holding those glaciers up so they don't slide in and increase sea level rise. It's very interesting, though, when we were there, I would say once an hour I would hear a massive explosion, and it would be when a glacier or an ice sheet would lose a big piece of ice and calve, if you've heard that word, the glacier, the ice sheets would be calving. They sound like massive explosions. Again, it was like absolutely like, whoa, what is that? Every hour. It was ridiculous. And so you see that little harbor there. I didn't realize this till I witnessed it. That kind of calving of the glaciers, it creates tidal waves. It creates tsunamis in the right places. They're so big, they crash in, and they push the water onto the other side. And so, like, my team was there on that rock and sand area. So were some leopard seals and a whole bunch of penguins. And you could see this, I don't know, maybe it's not that big, but 4 or 5 foot tsunami coming towards you. So we were all running up to safety, including the penguins and the leopard seals and the humans. It was ridiculous. But that's kind of like what goes on. And a bunch of my teammates had all their gear on the beach. What do you think happened to the gear? Yeah, it went way back out, which is not good because you've got anti-pollution laws, right? You can't be doing that. So that stuff went all the way out. But again, lots of fjords and these dramatic visuals are amazing. So to give you an idea about how it's changing, and I know you do migration and asylum issues, and I do too. I do a lot of work on climate migration. We worry a lot about people forcibly moving away from areas because they're being degraded by disasters. We see it all over. It's old news. It's been going on. It's going to go on even more in the future. It's very interesting looking up in the polar regions. What we're seeing is we definitely see that. Some of the climate migrants are going up, but you also see almost like climate opportunism, sort of, I don't know how to describe it. People taking advantage of not advantage, but they're looking for opportunities, new parts of the world that they may not have seen or you couldn't go to before, it was too hard, are now opening up. They're warmer. They're easier to get to. The ice is melting, so you're seeing, it's very interesting, you're seeing a massive increase in tourism to Antarctica. And again, growing up, those of you my age in this, you're like, you don't go to Antarctica, go be a tourist. You do now. You do now. In fact, you all can Google that when you leave here. You'll see all kinds of different trips to Antarctica because it's warmer and it's melting. And ever since COVID in particular, tourism has basically tripled in Antarctica. They're up to 120,000 tourists a year, eco-tourists a year, ironically. It's governed by the International Association for Antarctic Tour Operators, so they try to regulate it very closely. You don't just show up and start having a barbecue, but you know what I mean? You're part of these organized groups. You've got to get permission to be in certain places. It's all very coordinated and orchestrated. Most tourists will come in from southern Argentina or Chile. And I think, did I see, is Justin here tonight? Or I didn't see Justin. Oh, there, thank you. Yes, so we were talking about this last night. Thank you, Elizabeth. So you all are going to southern South America. So that's how a lot of tourists will go to Antarctica. They go down to Ushuaia, down in southern Argentina, and they'll catch a tour ship across the Drake Passage. The Drake Passage is the roughest water in general on Earth for a passage, very violent waves. When I was there, they were 20-foot waves, which were quiet. They sometimes get 30, 40, or higher foot waves. It's ridiculous. But you can take medication a day. Shackleton didn't have that as an option. I'm glad I did. I would never have made it. But you pop on your patch behind the ear, pop maybe a Zofran, whatever the doctor gives you, and about 2.5 days later, you'll be from southern South America in Antarctica. So it's doable now. So people do go, and there's an amazing amount of activities that they're doing down there, canoeing, kayaking, polar plunge off of the boats, very common. We went camping when we were there. We camped for a couple of days on the continent. The companies provide all the gear, set it up, and then you camp there. Yeah, paddle boarding. How many of you have done diving? Any scuba divers or skin divers here? It's like you can now do this in Antarctica. I know. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. It was fascinating to see and troubling in a lot of ways. But this is what they're doing in Antarctica now. So tourism is huge. Tourism is also even bigger up in the Arctic, the northern circumpolar world, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that too if you have questions on that. These trips tend to be pretty difficult with extreme remoteness and logistics. But my point for talking about it, in addition to telling you should just, if you get a chance to go, it's amazing. It's very multinational, very, very ethnically diverse. The workforce for the tourism industry. We do see climate migrants coming in from the Philippines, other parts of the Pacific. They're working there. Filipinos have been on Antarctica for decades. They were one of the earliest workforces down in Antarctica. They're amazing. Absolutely love working with them. You'll see Russians as the engineers for most of the ships because they do ice breaking, they do extreme cold shipping. You'll see Chinese workers everywhere. You'll see people from all over the Pacific. All South Americans are down there working. So incredibly ethnically diverse. So we have to look at these issues too when we look about how the human terrain of an area is changing and what are the implications of that from a global security perspective. So it's changing. It really surprised me. And that, in fact, Justin, Elizabeth, if you guys do get down, that is Ushuaia there, and that's Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego, all of that. And then you have these kinds of ships that you get in, and they take you down to Antarctica, and then when you're on the bigger ship to get on the continent, you can't like get on and off big ships to go to the continent. They'll get you out in little groups of maybe 10 people at a time in a Zodiac with usually Filipino guides who do a great job, and you're going back and forth in little boats, and you get on and off the continent. So that's kind of what it looks like. So again, very, very diverse. I'm used to looking at issues up in the northern polar area between the Americans, the Russian government, Chinese government, NATO, non-state actors, other group, the Arctic Aid, and all of this stuff. You have all of that intrigue going on, not just in the northern pole, but in the South Pole as well. The Russians, among the Europeans, they've been there longest. They've been there for 200 years. Actually, Russian ships were the first to get there from the European powers. I got to tell you, as someone who does a lot of work with Pacific Islanders, there are actually Pacific Islander, like Polynesian types of oral stories from centuries that they talk about having been to Antarctica. They talk about being close enough to see the huge white mountain ranges. Okay? You can get through the Drake Passage if you time it right. You can do that. The Pacific Islanders have been all over. They've been up to the Arctic. They've been all over. Okay, so no reason to think they weren't also there. But the Russians are the first of the Europeans to get there about 200 years ago. They're very interested today, from a political standpoint. They're looking for the potential. They want to hedge their bets if the treaty may get renegotiated in 25 years, that they might be able to access maybe oil, gas, minerals, fishing, these types of things. And the Russians view themselves as a polar power. Even though they are one of the Arctic 8 nations up north, they view themselves as a polar power. And frankly, they were there 200 years ago. All right, so they've done that. They have, I think, 5 year-round stations, Vostok Station. It's very interesting. The Chinese government is already very active as well down in Antarctica. And in Mandarin, the Chinese government also views itself as aiming to be a polar superpower, not Arctic power, not near Arctic power, a polar power. All right, so it's important to look at, how, and us too, right? All these countries view themselves very differently. They've been active on the continent really since the early 80s. They have about 35 expeditions. They've got 5 permanent stations. By the way, Antarctica as a whole has about 70 permanent stations, more than 30 countries with a footprint, on there as well. We worry a lot in Antarctica about issues of what we call lawfare, not about military troops and tanks and missiles and any conventional type of warfare. We worry about countries using legal means to weaken international treaties. And we have seen this happening already in recent years, where the protection of marine resources treaty, Governor Kemmler treaty, and that has been weakened. So we need to keep an eye on these kinds of issues. It's a concern. I got to tell you, from an environmental security standpoint, some of the issues that we are looking at is this massive increase in polar tourism. What are the issues related to an increase in polar tourism? On a certain level, it's good. You end up going there, you come back, and you end up being an ambassador for the protection of these issues. But at the same time, it means we're adding more of a human, footprint back and forth up there, and that's a concern. So there's talk of trying to tighten up a lot of the tourism now that's occurring in those areas. Water security. So the northern polar area, Greenland, for instance, are ice sheets. There's a lot of water, fresh water melting already. There's talk of why can we not figure out ways and really focus on it to, if we can't stop it, at least can we not capture fresh water that is just being wasted going into the ocean and changing currents. Those same conversations are being had about Antarctica as well. There are actually countries, for instance, in the Gulf states, some of them, this sounds crazy, but it's been looked at, again, for a number of years, the towing of icebergs. And yeah, you're going to lose part of that. Remember, some of these icebergs are huge. They're the size of carriers. Can you tow them? Can you get them to places where you need fresh water? South Africa was looking at it a few years ago when they had their a big drought. We do look at human migration. So climate migrants already are up in the northern polar area. We're seeing opportunities for workers to come into the southern area. We're even looking at, you want to blow your mind, we're even talking about climate migration to space 30, 50 years down the road. We need workers. Who's going to do the work in space as humans move into space, right? And so that for all of you young people in here, these are some of the really cool things you can be involved with in the future on security. It's fascinating. And potentially future for food security. We are looking at northern Russia, northern Greenland, northern Canada for food security. By 2100, those areas will be warm. Does that mean parts of Antarctica may be able to support some type of food production, right? And what do we do with that? So again, this very typical scene in Antarctica, these incredible shapes and the pristine nature of it, the silence. It's been said you don't go there to find yourself, you go there deliberately to lose yourself. It's very divine, it's very sacred, it's a phenomenal place. And I would just close by saying we really need to start paying attention to it. We cannot wait 25 years. There is too much international competition already over Antarctica. I'll give you an example I read recently. The Iranian government is even sending an expedition now, naval expedition. Okay, so countries are doing this. There's a lot of international intrigue and interest in certain parts of the world that are increasingly warming and becoming more accessible. So important, too, that we don't think just Arctic, but that we actually think polar, both north and southern polar areas, and look at that as a balanced area. I'd say, any of you interested in legal careers, law? Any of you want to be lawyers? Any of our young people? Another interesting area to get involved in, international treaties, right? Big area. This is right up your alley. And I would say, too, it's interesting when I work, as people from the U.S., we do, my job anyway, we focus a lot on the Arctic, the northern Arctic. Alaska is an Arctic state, the top third of it, northwest borough, it's Arctic, above the Arctic Circle. But down south, the southern hemisphere, we tend to not think a lot about Antarctica, but boy, our allies do down there. The Chileans, the Argentinians, the South Africans, the Australians, the New Zealanders, their colonels talk to me all the time like, hey, we need to be working together and looking at some of these issues, how they affect the southern hemisphere as well. So this is my contact information, and I'm very happy to, remain in touch with you folks or, hear more from you as you go throughout your own careers or different fields. I've already had some very cool conversations with a number of you. But anyway, that's how to reach me. And with that, I would like to open it up to questions, comments, observations, thoughts, and we can talk security issues, and then we can definitely, frankly, talk about tour issues as well if you're interested in getting involved more in Arctic or Antarctic communities and how to go about doing that. So thank you very much.
Just take a second. Don't go away. I just want to slide in. So, thank you, and Michele, as she wishes to be called, even though Dr. Michele Devlin, but she prefers Michele, as she said. What I'd like to do, as she said, is open it up without flipping it. There we go. Thank you. My father would say I expected that. Anyway. So let's take a few minutes for questions, and then we will close, and I'll talk about what next month's presentation is. So let me ask one question to start with, Jerry, if I could jump in before you. Decades ago, we said that space was going to be a non-confrontational area of maybe competition, but it was not going to involve warfare. Well, you can see what's evolved. And in fact, if I heard correctly today, the Chinese are about to launch 13,000 satellites. There's a term for that mass of satellites, and I don't recall what it is right now. So, having said that, when you look at the Antarctic, and we say the same thing, no competition, no contention, no warfare, but lawfare, do you see any evolution in that direction where there could be contention and physical contention and force on force?
Thank you, Jim. Great question. And your point is very well taken. After looking at all these issues, so you've got the Arctic up north. I personally view Antarctica to be like the Arctic on steroids. And then I feel like Antarctica is a training ground for space on steroids, even larger. There are similarities between all three regions. In fact, we are even looking at the War College of doing a remote regions program linking these three areas, Arctic, Antarctic, and space. They are connected. A number of our astronauts, NASA, very active in the Arctic and Antarctica for training. If you want to get humans to Mars and scientists to Mars and stuff, where are you going to train them on Earth? Where you have darkness potentially a few months of the year, extreme cold, extreme winds, extreme isolation, you're all alone. How do they handle that mentally? You do it in Antarctica. If you want to know how to build space stations on ice in space, where do you learn that and practice that? You do it in places like Antarctica. Okay, that's part of what some of our competitors are doing there, is it's training for space, and very fascinating. So you've got this whole Antarctic Treaty System, international laws, peaceful area, everything's, kumbaya. Okay. The International Space Treaty is based on the Antarctic Space Treaty. Are we worried about this being violated just like we are about the Antarctic Treaty? Yes, we are. It's something that we have to be very concerned about. In terms of what I've looked at and talked with a number of specialists, I don't think we're talking about actual armed conflict on Antarctica, at least not for any significant time in the future. It really tends to be more lawfare, weakening of the Antarctic Treaty System, so that potentially there could be development there, some limited development there, economic gains, and then the issue of the potential for dual use stations by other countries. That's something that we definitely have to take a look at. That's something that's of concern. So those tend to be the bigger issues that we're looking at now.
Great, thank you. Jerry?
So to add to those comments, have the treaties been already weakened, and could you give some more examples of how they are or could be weakened?
Yeah, another good question. So how many of you are, where's our Youper here? How many of you are from Michigan? And when you ask someone from Michigan, they'll usually hold up their hand and say, hey, I'm here, here, here. So I use the same analogy, but with Antarctica. If you want to talk about Antarctic security stuff, hold your hand like this and look at it. So this is like the peninsula. That's where a lot of the tourists will go. McMurdo Station, the Americans have their big station down here. So what we've seen for about the past 6 years, we've been very concerned because the governments of Russia and China have banded together, for instance, and they've weakened the CAMLAR component of the treaty, which looks at the protection of marine protected areas. And because of the way voting is done, and it tends to be more consensus, you can block protections through politicking and collaboration and partnership. So of here, we've seen a weakening of protection here, here, and here, basic in those general areas of some of the marine assets. We're worried about that type of scenario can be done. There's also been efforts by the Chinese government to try to make the case for, right now the theme is conservation, no development, just, we're not doing economic activity, no military. It's just peaceful research and conservation. The argument of their government now has been more of rational use. Not total, we're going to tear this up and mine this and do this and totally destroy an area, but rational use controlled, limited economic use. And so this has sent some of the Antarctic Treaty groups are concerned about this and having arguments or, push back about this. So it's constant. So again, if any of you end up, of our younger people here, if you end up majoring in law, international treaties, migration, you could talk forever on asylum law and what we're not doing and should be doing, and our climate refugee, our climate migrants, environmentally displaced, should they be classified as refugees? Should they be eligible for benefits? So a lot of this stuff now is becoming international law because of the environment and the different way people are adapting to it and nations are looking for opportunities.
There's one more in the back.
Yeah, Michelle, along those lines is what becomes the inflection point? Because the context of what you presented was the extraction from Antarctica versus what we're learning from Antarctica. And you look at the geopolitics at play and it seems like that it's a race to what can I get and what can I extract versus what I change as a country. So I'm just curious, your take on what becomes the true inflection point between China, Russia, and the United States in this race to either gain or race to really change?
Yeah, it's very troubling. From myself personally and professionally, I am concerned exactly about that. Where it did used to be the emphasis was on research collaboration. Actually, some of the world's best climate research is done on Antarctica. They've been looking at these environmental protection issues for years, right? But increasingly, with warmer temperatures, more thawing, you see this real shifting of nations increasingly are thinking, rational use, Can we get something out of it without totally destroying it? You hear more and more conversations like that, and I think the rate of environmental change, the severity, is pushing more nations into having conversations like that. That is what I'm seeing. I'm concerned about it.
Thank you. Yes.
Does the U.S. currently have any plans or ambitions about exploiting Antarctica economically?
At this point, they tend to, and it's interesting, I know a number of you are military people here, just so you know, the whole continent of Antarctica falls under Indo-PACOM. Those of you that are military, it's kind of interesting, even though parts of it are very far away from Indo-PACOM. But it is not under Department of Defense control. It's under the, obviously falls under the Antarctic Treaty System, so the State Department is really our lead on this, and then the National Science Foundation. And all in all, they pretty much are really, I think, to the best of their ability, trying to keep it more for scientific purposes, try to protect it, try to conserve it, continue to partner in environmental and other research. So I don't pick up a whole lot of the economic element. I pick up concerns strategically about competitors wanting a bigger share of it in the event they can weaken the treaty and modify it in 25 years. Yeah.
Justin?
Doesn't the whole thing change if precious metals and petroleum is discovered there, and then what happens?
So we've had this issue in the Arctic, and for many years we were trying to protect the Arctic. You are seeing a lot of interest right now up in the northern polar areas, circumpolar world, precious minerals, oil, gas. The Arctic up north is believed to have about 15% of the untapped oil reserves on Earth, 30% of the gas, the rare earth minerals that we ironically need for a green revolution. You are definitely seeing a lot of economic interest in the northern circumpolar world, including among many indigenous populations. Even they do not agree on whether the ones that actually live in that area above the Arctic Circle, to what extent should they do sustainability versus development. I think what saves us with Antarctica, again, is we don't have indigenous populations. You got 4,000 workers, and then the tourists and the crews that support them. So It's a little different, but I'm nervous, Justin. I'm nervous. Can I be cynical in front of young minds and you all that are going to go off and this is your career? I think you need to be careful. I think you need to watch out because that's what happens. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do any of our students, have a question? Yeah. I don't believe it, but I'll accept it. So, okay. Let me thank Michele, Dr. Devlin, very much for a terrific presentation. Really enjoyed it. Not only what you presented, but how you presented. It was very good. And the answers to the questions, I think, were superb.
Thank you. I hope I would just, close by saying again, thank you all so much, Jim, because you're fantastic. And I do, if you get a chance, and if you can do it, in a good, sustainable way, these parts of the world are important to see. They are changing rapidly. I've worked with tour guides there, people that go back constantly. They say by the year it's changing. It's important to see the way these parts of the world look. There are lots of different opportunities to do it now. You can even go and help, be a volunteer or service projects. You can volunteer on some different kinds of scientific projects in Antarctica, especially in college for our young people as you go on. And again, hopefully some of our younger people will major in a lot of these different fields. We need your brains. Yeah, we need you in science and technology and math and engineering and security, big picture world, the world. You are a citizen of the world, right? You may be a citizen of our country, but you're also of the world, and we need you really thinking big picture. So I'm really glad you're here, and I think you've got a lot of adults in this room that would love to be great mentors for you, too. They're very well-traveled. It's a very, very sharp group of people here. So anyway, thank you all very much. I wish you the best. Thanks so much.
What was that expression? Not practical use, but what use was it? Thank you. Yes. So I was just checking there. There is an expression that I learned tonight that I've really, putting the words together makes sense to me, and that is rational use. I think that's a terrific expression to take away from this presentation. One last thing. Chip O'Brien over here has, and as does Susan, a questionnaire looking for interest from our members as to what you might be interested for future presentations. There are some ideas on there already. You can check the block or add what you think would be important to you. Last, I want to say, here's the Save the Fall dates for our fall program. Thanks for putting up with my hoarseness. It drives me crazy. But the next presentation will be here. It'll be on the 19th, presented by, as you can see, retired Ambassador James Jeffrey. Got a terrific background, and I'm looking forward to that presentation on Turkey, which we have not had a presentation on before, so I really think it's important that we catch up on that area. So with that, thank you all for coming. Be safe going home, and we'll see you next month.